You're going to want to teach your classroom management plan on the first day of school. How you do it, though, is absolutely critical and will go a long way toward establishing a culture of learning and polite behavior in your classroom. So in today's video, we're going to go over the 7 steps you need, the 7 proven steps that will ensure that you get off to a great start. Before we get there, however, please do me a favor and subscribe to this channel. Give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment below. I would really appreciate it. Okay, so the first step is always you must explain to your new class why. Why? Kids always want to know why, and there's also a lot of psychology related to this idea that people just want to know the reason why you're making the decisions that you're making. And when you explain why, even if that reason isn't particularly compelling, those people who are listening to you or your students are far more likely to buy into what you're saying. It's when you don't explain why, when you sort of have this attitude of my way or the highway, that you get into a lot of trouble, that you get into a lot of pushback. For our purposes and at Smart Classroom Management, the why is always to protect your right to learn and enjoy being in this classroom. And that's your explanation when anyone, a parent, administrator, or a student, asks you why you have a classroom management plan, why you are so adamant and strict about following your plan to a T, your consequences. It's always because your students have a right to learn, and they do. And you're the only one in position to protect them via your classroom management plan. The next step is that you're simply going to read it from front to back, from start to finish. You're going to read your plan. And the plan should be just the simple rules and consequences part of it. So if you have a syllabus, you're not going to read your entire syllabus in this moment. You may at another time. But for the purposes of teaching your plan the first day of school, you just want to go over the rules. You want to read the rules as they're stated and the consequences. I mentioned this in a previous video, but you should have your rules and consequences posted on the wall of your classroom. Actually, I think it was an article I wrote just a couple of weeks ago on the importance of doing this. It should be in large posters at the front of your room so your students can see it from wherever they're sitting and you can refer to it whenever you need to. It's a way of saying, I'm following this in order to protect your right to learn in this classroom without being bullied or made fun of, or have your learning disrupted by someone else in the class. So you're just going to read it, read your rules, and read your consequences. Next, you're going to make a very important promise. You're going to promise your students that you're going to follow it to a T, exactly as it's written and as you will teach subsequently. You're going to follow it exactly as it is written. That means you're not going to add anything to it, but you're also not going to subtract anything from it. So in other words, if it says that you get a consequence for breaking one of these rules, you're going to follow through. It's a promise you make to your students. You're saying to them, I care about you, and I care about your learning, and I care about you loving being part of this classroom, no matter who you are, no matter your personality, if you're shy, if you've had challenges in the past. I don't care. I'm going to take care of anyone. And this is an act of your classroom management plan is an act of care and love toward your students. It is not something that is cruel and never will be. That's going to lead us to a future promise that we're going to make at number 7. But the next step is that you're going to model your rules. Now, depending on your grade level, this is going to look different. I do recommend that you're going to model an example of rule breaking for each rule. So an example of how each rule is broken. Just one example. You don't have to go over every single way each rule can be broken. I also want to mention that this is just the first day of school. So this is the initial teaching of your plan. You will spend the rest of the week and the following week even adding little details, sharpening up those rules, and so the boundary lines are clear for your students. This is something we'll talk about in subsequent videos. This is a first in a series of videos on classroom management during the first day of school, first week of school, first month of school. So for the next 5 weeks or so, even longer, I'm going to be going through all of these things to ensure that you have a great start. So you're going to model your rules. If you are an elementary school teacher, you're going to physically model them. So you're going to show what not keeping your hands to yourself looks like. For example, you're going to show, you may even sit in a student's chair and switch places with a student, pretend they're the teacher and you're the student, and you're going to model how not to call out, how not to raise their hand in class. So you're going to model calling out in class. For example, when you get up into middle school, and by the way, I would recommend a lot of modeling in middle school as well, but as they get into upper middle and high school, I recommend you can pantomime. So the students don't need you to model so explicitly. However, if I discover that they do need that, you need to be willing to do that. You need to be willing to go there. So after the first week, if you need to reteach your plan and you need to do so in even more detail, then you can do that. However, just pantomiming it in front of the class is enough. You don't have to show them, precisely in the part of the room an example of blowing their nose, for example, which you would for elementary students. So you're going to model your rules, and then you're going to model your consequences. So you're going to model your consequences. And this is, the way this works is you're going to explain as you're pantomiming or modeling exactly what you will say when a student misbehaves, exactly what you will do, how many steps you'll take toward them. And again, this depends on the grade level. Now we have specifics over at Smart Classroom Management. We have an elementary plan available and a high school plan available. And if you're a middle school teacher, you fall sort of right in between. Lower middle will use the elementary plan, upper middle will use the high school plan. You can read about the plans there and decide whether you want to download one of the plans. They are proven after decades of use with thousands of teachers. However, the real key is your follow through, is the promise of following through. So your consequences are less important than is your doing what you say you're going to do. That's where your power comes from, your consistency. Okay. But you want to model, okay, here's what I'm going to say to you, or here's the signal I'm going to give you that lets you know you have a consequence. Now, for high school teachers, when I was a high school teacher, I made eye contact only with a student. And that was my initial warning. The specifics of the high school plan are different, quite different than the elementary plan, but it doesn't matter. You're going to model what the consequence looks like. You're also going to model what is the correct response from a student if they've misbehaved. So what is their responsibility? What are they to do? When you come approach them and say you have a warning, or you take a few steps and make eye contact, they make eye contact with you. If there's a timeout involved and they know it's a timeout, how do they get there? What are they supposed to do? Are they allowed to bring work there? And what is their responsibility there? How do they get out of timeout? These are all things that you're going to explain and model for your students. We talk a lot at Smart Classroom Management about the importance of transparency, about no surprises whatsoever. And so we want to be really clear. I will pretend I'm a student and model exactly how to go to timeout. Now, we'll have videos in the future exactly about timeout and how to make it super effective, about how to make just your warnings effective, and also how to take a simple consequence and make it matter to students who typically we think and often appear as if they don't care whatsoever. So we're going to take care of all those questions in future videos. There's also a video on classroom rules, and there's one on consequences, so please check those out. Okay, number 6 is that you're going to allow them to ask questions. So you're going to take questions from your class. If they don't have any, fine. It's nothing that you have to encourage. I've taught classes where there were lots of questions. The students really wanted to know everything about it. And again, you need to be transparent and be really clear. And we don't apologize for our rules and consequences. We don't hem and haw about them. We're really clear that this is how it's going to work. Very matter of fact. Some classes I've had where there were no questions, and that's fine. It doesn't matter. You're going to follow through either way. The last step is that you're going to make a final promise. So the first promise is that you're going to follow it like a T, right? You're going to be consistent. This is a way of putting soft pressure on yourself. It's also a way that you're going to communicate to students on the first day of school that you've got their back, that you're a leader worth following, that you do what you say and they can trust in your words. Now, we've talked on this channel, and there's lots of talk about building relationships with students. This is the first one, is them having trust in you, the most important one, the foundation upon which good relationships and good rapport are built, is that having a system of protecting them from learning, protecting your freedom to teach, and creating a classroom they love being a part of. You can't do any of that without a classroom management plan, without rules and consequences. And so that first promise is, hey, I'm doing this. This is what it is. And you're throwing your hat, your metaphorical hat over the wall, and you're going to do this. You're going to promise. And this is something, again, you're putting soft pressure on yourself, saying, I've said this to my students. I better follow through. The second promise is you're going to reiterate that you're going to follow through, but you're going to add that you will never speak to them, react to them in an angry manner. You're not going to lecture. You're not going to use sarcasm. You're always going to speak to them kindly and with respect, regardless of misbehavior or anything. And if you want a well-behaved classroom, this is critical. It's the teachers who aren't consistent that tend to be lecturing, tend to get emotionally involved, tend to try to convince students to behave, and they have poor relationships with students, and it brings disrespect and pushback and, again, a poor relationship between you and your students. But when you promise to follow through and you promise to do so in a respectable manner every single time, no matter what, these students breathe easy. Again, they know that you have their back, and inside, they're cheering. they're happy that this is the case. They want to be in a classroom that makes sense, as opposed to the world outside that is complete chaos, a world that doesn't make sense. And so you're going to make that promise to your students as the final final thing. Again, this is just the initial teaching of your plan. You'll go into more detail, and we'll talk about that in future videos. You're also going to teach how not to follow rules, how to follow rules, and how not to follow rules. You'll model those things as well throughout the week. Teachers ask me how long this should take. Depends again on if you've done this before or not. It'll take you longer if it's your first time following this. Typically 30, 40 minutes, I would say, depending. The next question, and I included it here because it's a really, I think, important question I get asked a lot. When should I start holding students accountable? When should I begin this? And the answer is, you want to start now. So start immediately when you finish explaining. They're on record, and you're going to start holding them accountable. We'll talk about why this is so important and what a huge mistake it is to tell students, we're going to ease into it. And the problem with easing into anything, we're going to talk about that in a future video. In the meantime, please leave a comment below. If you have a specific question or topic you want me to cover related to this, please let me know. I'll do my best to respond there. If not, I'll make sure that I cover it in a future video. Okay, hope you're having a great week. See you next time.